to Pandemic Cooking. My name is Adele, or Ms. Stelmaschuk, or Ms. S, and we are going to be making a video today on how to make a loaf of bread. So one of the questions that I've been getting the most, not from my students because you already know, grade 11s and 12s, you're welcome. But one of the questions I'm getting from my Facebook community and Instagram is how to make bread. What's the difference between the different types of yeast? How am I going to have success? So there are two different types of yeast. If you can find them, great. If you can't, I'm sorry. So this is active dry yeast, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to show you. I've got two containers here of the different types of yeast. So this one that I'm opening up is instant yeast. This is what my kids thought was sand and sprinkle it all over the house. And this one is active dry. So you can obviously see a very clear difference here. And up before the pandemic, I was an instant yeast advocate all the time, but now after kind of being here, I've been playing around more with active dry, so that's what we're going to use today. So the difference is that instant, it does work a little bit faster. The biggest thing is that you don't have to dissolve it or soften it first. So you can go ahead and add that right to your flour. I just have been, and I'm gonna put it aside today, and the reason why is because I feel like the things that we've been doing with active dry, we've been getting some really good results. Would you agree, Ms. Ann?
I would agree.
Right? Like
everything's have been turning out well with it.
It has been, so I'm just gonna go with it. So I've got 1 cup of warm water here, and I'm gonna activate my yeast. I'm gonna make 2 loaves of bread today, so I'm gonna do 2 tablespoons of yeast, okay? Now I'm just going to take the edge of my spoon, or the bottom side of my spoon, I'm just gonna mix it up a little bit just to break up any clumps, okay? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some sugar to this. Because I'm doing 2 loaves, I'm gonna add 1 tablespoon of sugar, maybe a little bit scant, and I'm going to just feed the yeast. Now, what I actually feel really passionately about is that sugar is a little bit of a myth. We don't always have to feed the yeast. It does promote it. You do get more growth out of it. However, flour broken down is sugar. So if you're not adding sugar to your dough, it will still rise, your yeast will still work. It just might take a little bit longer. So thinking about the application, how fast you want this to happen, you might add a bit of sugar, you might not. Okay, I'm just gonna mix the sugar up in there a bit. Okay, well that's going. This is what's called a sponge. So sometimes you can add a little bit of flour to your sponge and get that yeast going, but I'm gonna leave it just with the water and the sugar. So in my mixer fitted with the hook attachment, I'm gonna start with 2 cups of flour. Now, again, what will be annoying to everybody is that I'm not going to be using a recipe. When I first teach this, can you pan up for a second? Hi everyone. When I first teach this, I teach my 20s how to do this with a starter that I've kind of come up with over the years. It's 1 cup of flour, 1 teaspoon of yeast, half a teaspoon of salt, a little bit of oil, like maybe a tablespoon, and about 2 cups, or pardon me, and 1 cup of warm water. So what we have is a 1-to-1 ratio. This is a batter. So what you're going to be doing is, as you're adding more flour, you should be adding another 2 parts of flour. So most doughs are 3-to-1 ratio. And again, and you've heard me talk about, I don't love using a recipe because it depends on what kind of flour we're using, how settled it is, how active our yeast is, our temperature of our water, all these types of things are going to impact how much flour we need. The most mistakes that I've seen in bread making is dumping all the flour in at once. And Ms. N is doing this. Yes, and once you've done that, it's done. Your bread
Andrew.
Andrew. So, Andrew is Ms. N's partner, and he just didn't bother asking her any questions because we don't have 1 million views. This is where viewers, you come in and really start promoting our
Please
videos.
validate us.
Please validate us. Okay, now I'm going to be adding 2 teaspoons of salt to my flour. Again, this might seem salty, but another problem that I notice with homemade bread is that it is bland. So I'm just going to mix the flour into this, or pardon me, the salt into this flour, and I'm going to come back in about 10 minutes when this yeast has grown a little bit more. So we'll see you in 10. Hi everyone, welcome back. Our yeast is looking really, really great. You can see that it's foamy. You can see that it's bubbling. If I keep leaving in here, you'll see that carbon dioxide keep working. So that's what those bubbles are, carbon dioxide. And when we get to, it's beautiful, right? And
beautiful.
When we come back and we show you how the bread has risen. I'll talk a little bit about the science behind it. So I've got another 1 cup of warm water here. I'm gonna add 2 tablespoons of canola oil, 1, 2. What a little bit of oil does in your bread is it just keeps it fresher for a little bit longer. And what you'll notice when you make homemade bread, it does not last very long. There's no preservatives in it, but having a little bit of oil does kind of lubricate the structure a little bit, and it gives you a little bit of a long-lasting dough. Now, this is the exact same thing that I would do for pizza crust. So just so you know, we're gonna make we're gonna make 2 loaves of bread today, but if you wanted to do pizza, this is the same thing. Mr. Dawson's got a really great video of how to make homemade pizza, but I just wanted to show you how to make a loaf. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add the warm water and the oil into the mixer, along with the cup of water with the yeast in it, okay? And I'm just gonna take my spatula and kind of get the rest in there. All right, so what you're going to see now is when I start mixing, this is still what I would call a sponge. This is a batter, spongy mixture. This obviously is not a dough, okay? So I just like to start with this amount and then I go from there. What I'm going to do, because I added 2 cups of flour, I'm gonna plan on having about 6 in total. So at the beginning, I'm gonna hit it with a cup of flour at a time, because I know that that's not going to toughen up the dough because it is it's still such a liquid, it's still such a batter. Okay, so now we're at 3 cups, 4 cups. I'm gonna turn it on a little bit. What I should be seeing at 4 cups of flour, 2 cups of liquid, is I should be seeing it starting to pull and creating a very, very shaggy dough. What shaggy means, you may have, if you've seen other YouTube videos, what that means is that it's really, it's still very, very, stringy. It's not holding together. All the words I'm thinking of are like, you know, I think about our premier, our prime minister. I'm thinking about is too moist, right? Make me better me now. All right, so it's pulling together. It's starting to create a dough. I'm gonna stop for a second. So this is what happens. So what often I see is like, oh, it's still quite wet. I'm gonna add another cup of flour. But what I need you to pay attention to is now it's created a ball. If I keep mixing it, kind of like the gnocchi dough, do you see? It's gonna fall apart again. So now I'm gonna reduce how much flour I'm adding. Now I'm gonna add half a cup, okay? Remember that if your dough's not coming together, crank up the mixer. Let that flour fly. Bring it into a ball again. What, 15 seconds? I'm gonna keep it on this high speed. I'm gonna watch the dough. Did you see that stick right there? What happened? And then it pulled away. I'm gonna touch the dough. If you see it like sticking like this, too dry, or pardon me, too wet. So I'm gonna add a little bit less flour this time. I'm gonna do 1/4 cup. So you see what I'm doing? Grade 10s, 11s, and 12s is I'm not being aggressive adding the flour. You have to be patient. And this is where you think, oh no, I've wrecked it, it's too dry. Be patient, be patient. It still needs kneading. Okay, so it's been kneading. What I'm looking for for at this point, so I can press the dough now, and even though it's soft, it's not sticking to my fingers, so I'm not gonna add any more flour at this point. If you do not have a KitchenAid mixer or a mixer with a dough hook, you're just gonna have to do it by hand. Oh, Mr. Dawson didn't, he used a mixer too. Maybe one day I'll do that for you. But watch and find another video, okay? There's gonna be some. If you have the mixer, use it. So what I'm going to do, this is what I'm looking for, okay? So I'm going to keep kneading it. I can tell that it is not ready because when I press it, it still has quite a big indentation. I also, can you see this down here, Mazen? This still looks really rough to me. So what we're looking for, and what I talk about when you're making bread, what we're doing while we're kneading the flour or we're kneading the dough is we are developing the gluten. So gluten, what I tell my students is think about those dinner rolls that you buy at Save on Foods or Safeway or whatever, and they're all attached and they're in 12, and then you pull them apart and then the little buns kind of separate. You can see that like elastic part of gluten, and to me, that is what it looks like. And that's why gluten replacement or like gluten-free bread just doesn't have the same texture, because what happens is as those gluten strands develop, that's what the carbon dioxide from the yeast pushes open, and you have those really like nice air bubbles, for lack of a better word, so the yeast can grow, okay? So I'm gonna get this on for a couple more minutes. I'll show you when it's done, and I'll show you how to let it rest, okay? See you in a minute. Okay, so this is my dough. What I like to do is I always like to take it out of the mixer and just kind of feel it by hand to see if there's anything else that it needs. It's got a nice smooth texture to it. You can kind of see now like more lines in the dough. So I'm just gonna take my mixing bowl. I'm gonna give it a spray with non-stick spray. I'm gonna pop it into the bowl and I'm gonna cover it with saran wrap. Now what we're going to let it do is we are going to let it rise or ferment. So I want to create a nice warm airproof lid or like wrap on this. And what I'm gonna do, this is a trick that I kind of learned, it's not really a trick. You can like turn your oven on super low, then turn it off and put it on with the light on. What I like to do is, and sorry, we're getting ready for another video. I like to find the warm spot on my oven, like where the vent is, right here. And I like to put the dough right there to rise. So I've got my oven preheated at 375. I'm gonna keep the oven on the whole time until the loaves of bread go in. Okay, so we're gonna come back in about an hour and we'll finish our loaves and get them in the oven. See you then, bye. Oh my God, welcome back. Look at our dough. Oh, that's the fermentation. It smells like yeast, it smells like bread. That fermentation is that huge rising of yeast. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna punch it down, expel some of those carbon dioxide bubbles, and get it onto the board. Now I've got 3 pans ready to go. And now actually that I've punched it down, I think it's gonna be 2, yeah? What do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be 2.
It'll be a little too small if you do 3.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so I'm gonna cut the dough into half, and what I'm going to do is I'm just gonna hand shape it. We don't wanna be kneading it anymore, but we do want to kind of flatten it out. I want it roughly the width of the pan. So I'm just gonna pull it a little bit here. So it's gonna lay this way. And then how you shape a loaf of dough, or a loaf of bread, pardon me, you're just simply going to roll it up, tuck the ends under, and pop it in your pan. I gave these pans a spray with like a cooking oil. I'm just gonna leave it like that. Now I'm gonna show you something else on this one. Press it out. Did you see that bubble there? I'm gonna squeeze that out, pop it. See, there's another one, here's another one. Okay, because what's gonna happen if those bubbles, if you don't get those out, they're going to grow in the dough. And have you ever gotten a loaf of bread and you cut it open and it's hollow on the inside because it's got a big air bubble in it and you can't make a sandwich with it? That's what we're trying to avoid, okay? We're gonna roll it up. What I didn't show you on the last one, this seam, okay, that's going on the bottom. So just make sure if it goes on the top, it's gonna open up right there. Try and get those little bubbles out. This is a very, very bubbly dough. Okay, into my pans, I'm gonna put them back on that warm spot on the oven, and now we're gonna let them proof. So now I'm just gonna take a clean tea towel, put it over, and I'm gonna let them proof. This is gonna be the second rising. So what I just did is called benching. That's just shaping your dough. So if you were making cinnamon buns or dinner rolls or something like that, that's the benching process. I'm gonna let them proof for about 20 minutes. While they're proofing, I'm gonna get a wash ready to put on them, and then they're gonna go into the oven and they're gonna bake until they're done. So when I teach bread, I teach making bread is like Jesus, okay? We have one rising, that's the fermentation. No, the first rising is the birth. It's the birth, it's the fermentation. I just have to really check my religious history there, it's not great. Then, second rising is like Easter Sunday, okay? Second rising is the proofing right here. But then, this is where yeast and Jesus, they fall apart. We're gonna have a third rising, which we're gonna talk about in a minute. Okay, see you in about 20. Bye. Okay, hi everyone. We're gonna get these loaves into the oven. They have proof for about 20 minutes. They've doubled in size again. So that was the second rising, like Easter Sunday, okay? The third rising is, Mr. Swanson's laughing at me. You're on the video now. Third rising is all on its own. The third rising is called the oven spring. So it's gonna be a dramatic rising of the dough in the oven. And we're gonna leave these in for about half an hour, like 30 to 40 minutes. We had a conversation about the wash. We're not gonna put anything on it. The purpose of a wash should be to help make a nice golden crust. There is some sugar in the dough though, and I just kind of wanna see what it's gonna look like without a wash. So we'll touch back in half an hour. I will show you my loaves of bread when they're done, and I'll show you how to tell when they're done. Okay, see you then. Welcome back to Pandemic Cook. We have panning happening right now. We've really stepped up our game. Just pan in on the panner right now. There he is. There's the big guy. Okay, our bread is ready to come out of the oven. It's been in for about half an hour, 40 minutes. This was with no wash. Looks beautiful. I'm happy. Okay, so now what you want to do, you want to risk the burn because you want to get it out of the pan, okay? So that's why I've got my baking or my cooling rack ready to go. This is why we grease the pans. Here's how you tell when bread is done. People are like, do we stick a toothpick in it? What do we do? Tap, tap, tap. It needs to sound hollow, okay? But for me, I don't love this here. It just looks a little bit wonky, but you can see the seam is on the bottom, okay? So that's why we bake that on the bottom. Otherwise, it would open up. And all you need to do is you need to get some butter. You need to slice it, get some butter, and enjoy this fresh-made pandemic bread. This is what people have been asking me about the most. I have a little sticker right there. Just grab what you got. There we go. Beautiful. Okay. This is it. If you have the skill, you can make this, or you just have the willingness to try. Whatever type of yeast you have, active or active dry or instant, you can make this. If you've got a mixer or not, you can make this, okay? It's super easy, but you have to have the time, and that's perfect with being at home. You can make the dough, let it rest, shape it, let it rest, and I've talked about this before in my videos. It's better than being in foods class because I'm like, get in the oven, skip the proofing. We never get this kind of volume and quality from our products in foods. So enjoy, let me know how it goes. Post your comments, pictures. Can you post a picture in a comment? Can you? Okay, post your pictures in the comments, show me how you did, and make sure you smash that subscribe button. Okay, bye.